Brussels in Belgium is considered the de facto capital of the European Union, having a long history of hosting the institutions of the European Union within its European Quarter. The EU has no official capital, and no plans to declare one, but Brussels hosts the official seats of the European Commission, Council of the European Union, and European Council, as well as a seat of the European Parliament. History: two chances. In 1951, the leaders of 6 European countries signed the Treaty of Paris, which created the European Coal and Steel Community, and with this new community came the first institutions: the High Authority, Council of Ministers, Court of Justice and Common Assembly. A number of cities were considered, and Brussels would have been accepted as a compromise, but the Belgian government put all its effort into backing Liège, opposed by all the other members, and was unable to formally back Brussels due to internal instability. Agreement remained elusive and a seat had to be found before the institutions could begin work. Hence, Luxembourg was chosen as a provisional seat, though with the Common Assembly in Strasbourg, as that was the only city with a large enough hemicycle. This agreement was temporary, and plans were set to relocate the institutions to Saarbrücken, which would serve as a European district, but this did not occur. The 1957 Treaties of Rome established 2 new communities, the European Economic Community and a European Atomic Energy Community. These shared the Assembly and Court of the ECSC but created 2 new sets of councils and commissions. Discussions on the seats of the institutions were left till the last moment before the treaties came into force, so as not to interfere with ratification. Brussels waited until only a month before talks to enter its application, which was unofficially backed by several member states. The members agreed in principle to locate the executives, councils and the assembly in one city, though could still not decide which city, so they put the decision off for 6 months. In the meantime, the assembly would stay in Strasbourg and the new commissions would meet alternatively at the ECSC seat and at the Château of Val-Duchesse. In Brussels, the councils would meet wherever the presidents wanted to. In practice, this was the castle in Brussels until autumn 1958, when it moved to central Brussels, 2 Rue Ravensteinstraat. Early expansion: Brussels missed out in its bid for a single seat due to a weak campaign from the government in negotiations. Despite widespread support from the people, the Belgian government eventually pushed its campaign and started large-scale construction, renting office space in the east of the city for use by the institutions. On the 11th of February 1958, the 6 governments concluded an unofficial agreement on the setting up of community offices, on the principle that it would take 2 years after a final agreement to prepare the appropriate office space. Full services were set up in Brussels in expectation of a report from the Committee of Experts looking into the matter of a final seat. While waiting for the completion of the building on Avenue de la Joyeuse in Trèves in Compsalon, offices moved to 51 to 53 Rue Belliard on the 1st of April 1958, though with the numbers of civil servants rapidly expanding. Services were set up in buildings on Rue de Marais, Broekstraat, Avenue de Brockvillelaan, Avenue de Tervurenlaan, Rue d'Arlon, Arlenstraat, Rue Joseph II, Joseph II Straat, Rue de la Loire, Wetstraat and Avenue de Kortenberglaan. The Belgian government further provided newly built offices on the Mont des Arts, Kunstberg for the Council of Ministers Secretariat and European Investment Bank. A committee of experts deemed Brussels to be the one option to have all the necessary features for a European capital, a large, active metropolis without a congested center, a poor quality of housing, good communications with other member states' capitals, including to major commercial and maritime markets, vast internal transport links, an important international business center, plentiful housing for European civil servants, and an open economy. Furthermore, it was located on the border between the two major European civilizations, Latin and Germanic, and was at the center of the first post-war integration experiment, the Benelux. As a capital of a small country, it also could not claim to use the presence of institutions to exert pressure on other member states, it being more of a neutral territory between the major European powers. The committee's report was approved of by the Council, Parliament and Commissions. However, the Council was still unable to achieve a final vote on the issue and hence put off the issue for a further 3 years, despite all the institutions now leading in moving to Brussels. The decision was put off due to the varied national positions preventing a unanimous decision. Luxembourg fought to keep the ECSC have compensation. France fought for Strasbourg, and Italy, initially backing Paris, fought for any Italian city to thwart Luxembourg and Strasbourg. Meanwhile, Parliament passed a series of resolutions complaining about the whole situation of spreading itself across 3 cities, though unable to do anything about it. The 1965 merger treaty was seen as an appropriate moment to finally resolve the issue. The separate commissions and councils were to be merged. Luxembourg, concerned about losing the high authority, proposed a split between Brussels and Luxembourg, the Commission and Council in the former, with Luxembourg keeping the Court and Parliamentary Assembly, together with a few of the Commission's departments. This was largely welcomed but opposed by France, not wishing to see the Parliament leave Strasbourg, and by Parliament itself, which wished to be with the executives and was further annoyed by the fact it was not consulted on the matter of its own location. Hence the status quo was maintained with some adjustments. The Commission, with most of its departments, would be in Brussels, as would the Council, but in April, June and October it would meet in Luxembourg. In addition, Luxembourg would keep the Court of Justice, some of the Commission's departments and the Secretariat of the European Parliament. Strasbourg would continue to host Parliament. Joining the Commission was the merged Council Secretariat. The ECSC Secretariat merged with the EECs and EAECs in the Ravenstein building, which then moved to the Charlemagne building, next to the Berlaymont, in 1971. In Brussels, staff continued to be spread across a number of buildings, on the Rue Belliardstraat, Avenue de la Joyeuse in Trier, Leida in Comsolan, Rue du Marais, Broekstraat and at Mont des Arts, Kunstberg. The first purpose-built building was the Berlaymont building in 1958, designed to house 3,000 officials, which soon proved too small, causing the institution to spread out across the neighborhood. Yet, despite the agreement to host these institutions in Brussels, its formal status was still unclear, and hence the city sought to strengthen its hand with major investment in buildings and infrastructure. However, these initial developments were sporadic, with little town planning and based on speculation. However, the 1965 agreement was a source of contention for the Parliament, which wished to be closer to the other institutions. So it began moving some of its decision-making bodies, committee and political group meetings to Brussels. In 1983 it went further by symbolically holding a plenary session in Brussels, in the basement of the Mont des Arts Congress Centre. However, the meeting was a fiasco and the poor facilities partly discredited Brussels' aim of being the sole seat of the institutions. Things looked up for Brussels when Parliament gained its own plenary chamber in Brussels in 1985 for some of its part sessions. This was done done unofficially due to the sensitive nature of the Parliament's seat, with the building being constructed under the name of an international conference centre. When France unsuccessfully challenged Parliament's half-move to Brussels in the Court of Justice, Parliament's victory led it to build full facilities in Brussels, Edinburgh and a European Council. In response, the Edinburgh European Council of 1992 adopted a final agreement on the location of the institutions. According to this decision, which was subsequently annexed to the Treaty of Amsterdam, although Parliament was required to hold some of its sessions, including its budget session, in Strasbourg, extra sessions and committees could meet in Brussels. It also reaffirmed the presence of the Commission and Council in the city. Shortly before this summit, the Commission moved into the Bradel building. This was due to asbestos being discovered in the Parlement, forcing its evacuation in 1989. The Commission threatened to move out of the city, which would have destroyed Brussels' chances of hosting the Parliament. So the government stepped in to build the Bradel building a short distance from the Parliament in 23 months, ensuring the Commission could move in before the Edinburgh summit. Shortly after Edinburgh, Parliament bought its new building in Brussels. With the status of Brussels now clear, NGOs, lobbyists, advisory bodies and regional offices started basing themselves in the quarter near the institutions. The council, which had been expanding into further buildings as it grew, consolidated once more in the Justice Lipsius building, and in 2002 it was agreed that the European Council should also be based in Brussels, having previously moved between different cities as the EU's presidency rotated. From 2004, all councils were meant to be held in Brussels. However, some extraordinary meetings are still held elsewhere. The reason for the move was in part due to the experience of the Belgian police in dealing with protesters and the fixed facilities in Brussels. Status: the Commission employs 25,000 people and the Parliament employs about 6,000 people. Because of this concentration, Brussels is a preferred location for any move towards a single seat for Parliament, despite it not formally being the capital of the EU. Some commentators see the fact that Brussels enticed an increasing number of Parliament's sessions to the city, in addition to the main seats of the other two main political institutions, as making Brussels the de facto capital of the EU. Brussels is frequently labeled as the capital of the EU, particularly in publications by local authorities, the Commission and press. Indeed, Brussels interprets the 1992 Agreement on Seats as declaring Brussels as a capital. There are two further cities hosting major institutions, Luxembourg and Strasbourg. Authorities in Strasbourg and organizations based there also refer to Strasbourg as the capital of Europe and Brussels. Strasbourg and Luxembourg are also referred to as the joint capitals of Europe. In 2010, Vice President of the United States Joe Biden, while speaking to the European Parliament, stated that Brussels, like Washington, D.C., had its own claim to be capital of the free world. Lobbyists and journalists like Washington, D.C., Brussels is a center of political activity with ambassadors to Belgium, NATO and the Union being based in the city, with there being more ambassadors based in the city than in the U.S. capital. There's also a greater number of press corps in Brussels, with media outlets in every Union member state having a Brussels correspondent, and there are 10,000 lobbyists registered. Of the 1,200 accredited journalists in Brussels, 1,000 are from outside Belgium. 120 of these are from Germany alone. However, there has been a disproportionately small representation of U.S. press in Brussels, with very few newspapers having correspondents based in the city. Accessibility: Brussels is located in the urban center of Europe, between Paris, London, Rhine and Ruhr, and the Randstad. Via high-speed trains, Brussels is around 1h25 from Paris, 1h 3H50 from London, Amsterdam and Cologne, 3H from Frankfurt. The Eurocap project plans to improve Brussels' links to the south to Luxembourg City and Strasbourg. Brussels is also served by Brussels Airport, located in the nearby Flemish municipality of Zaventem, and by the smaller Brussels South Charleroi Airport, located near Charleroi, some 50 kilometers from Brussels. Quarter. Most of the institutions are located within the European Quarter of Brussels, which is the unofficial name of the area corresponding to the approximate triangle between Brussels Park, Cinquantenaire Park and Leopold Park. The Commission and Council are located in the heart of this area near to the Schuman station at the Schuman roundabout on the Rue de la Loire. The European Parliament is located over the Brussels-Luxembourg station, next to Luxembourg Square. The area, much of which was known as the Leopold Quarter for much of its history, was historically residential, an aspect which was rapidly lost as the institutions moved in. Although the change from a residential area to a more office-oriented one had already been underway for some time before the arrival of the European institutions. Historical and residential buildings, although still present, have been largely replaced by modern offices. These buildings were built not according to a high-quality master plan or government initiative, but according to speculative private sector construction of office space, without which most buildings of the institutions would not have been built. However, due to Brussels' attempts to consolidate its position, there was large government investment in infrastructure in the quarter. Authorities are keen to stress that the previous chaotic development has ended, being replaced by planned architecture competitions and a master plan. Architect Benoit Moritz has argued that the area has been an elite enclave surrounded by poorer districts since the mid-19th century, and that the contrast today is comparable to an Indian city. However, he also said that the city has made progress over the last decade in mixing land uses, bringing in more businesses and residences, and that the institutions are more open to interacting with the city. The quarter's land use is very homogeneous and criticized by some, for example former Commission President Romano Prodi, for being an administrative ghetto isolated from the rest of the city. There is also a perceived lack of symbolism, with some such as Rem Koolhaas proposing that Brussels needs an architectural symbol to represent Europe. Others do not think this is in keeping with the idea of the EU, with Umberto Eco viewing Brussels as a soft capital, rather than it being an imperial city of an empire. It should reflect the EU's position as the server of Europe. Despite this, the plans for redevelopment intend to deal with a certain extent of visual identity in the quarter. Commission buildings. The most iconic structure is the Parlement, the primary seat of the Commission. It was the first building to be constructed for the community, originally built in the 1960s. It was designed by Lucien de Vestel, Jean Gilson, André Pollack and Jean Pollack and paid for by the Belgian government. It was inspired by the UNESCO headquarters building in Paris, designed as a four-pointed star on supporting columns, and at the time an ambitious design. Originally built with flock asbestos, the building was renovated in the 1990s to remove it and renovate the aging building to cope with enlargement. After a period of exile in the Bradel building on the Avenue de Ordegem, Oude Gemlaan, the Commission reoccupied the Parlement in 2005 and bought the building for €550 million. The President of the Commission occupies the largest office near the Commission's meeting room on the top floor. Although the main Commission building, it houses only 2,000 out of the 20,000 Commission officials based in Brussels. In addition to the Commissioners and their cabinets, the Parlement also houses the Commission's Secretariat General and Legal Service. Across the Quarter, the Commission occupies 865,000 square meters in 61 buildings, with the Berlaymont and Charlemagne buildings the only ones over 50,000 square meters. Other institutions. Across the Rue de la Loire from the Berlaymont is the Justice Lipsius building, which houses the Council of the European Union and the European Council. The Council's Secretariat had originally been based in the city centre, and then in the Charlemagne building, joining the other European buildings centred on the Schumann roundabout. The European Council will move into Residence Palace next door once it has been renovated, and the Lex building beyond it was occupied by the Council in 2007. The renovation and construction of the new council building was intended to change the image the European Quarter, and is designed by the architect Philippe Samin to be a feminine and jazzy building to contrast with the hard, more masculine architecture of other EU buildings. The building features a lantern-shaped structure surrounded by a glass atrium made up of recycled windows from across Europe, intended to appear united from afar but showing the diversity up close. The Parliament's buildings are located to the south between Leopold Park and Luxembourg Square, over Brussels Luxembourg Station, which is underground. The complex, known as the Espace Léopold, has two main buildings, Paul Henry Sporach and Altiero Spinelli, which cover 372,000 square meters. The complex is not the official seat of the Parliament, with its work being split with Strasbourg and Luxembourg. However, the decision-making bodies of the Parliament, along with its committees and some of its plenary sessions, are held in Brussels to the extent that 3/4 of its activity take place in Brussels. The Parliament buildings were extended, with the new D4 and D5 buildings being completed and occupied in 2007 and 2008. It is believed the complex now provides enough space for Parliament, with no major new building projects foreseen. The European External Action Service has been based in the Triangle building since the 1st of December 2010. The Economic and Social Committee and the Committee of the Regions together occupy the Delors building, which is next to Leopold Park and used to be occupied by the Parliament. They also use the office building Bertha von Suttner. Both buildings were named in 2006. Brussels also hosts two agencies, the European Defence Agency and the Executive Agency for Competitiveness and Innovation. There is also EUROCONTROL, a semi-EU air traffic control agency covering much of Europe and the Western European Union, which is a non-EU military organization which is merging into the EU's CFSP. Demography and economic impact. The EU presence in Brussels has created significant social and economic impact. Jean-Luc Vanra, member of the Brussels Parliament responsible for the city's external relations, goes as far to say the prosperity of Brussels is a consequence of the European presence, as well as the institutions themselves. Large companies are drawn to the city due to the EU presence. In total, about 10% of the city has a connection to the international community. 46% of the population of Brussels are from outside Belgium. Of these, half are from other EU member states. About 3/5 of European civil servants live in the Brussels capital region, with 63% in the communes around the European district. Half of civil servants are homeowners. The institutions draw in, directly employed and employed by representatives, 50,000 people to work in the city. A further 20,000 people are working in Brussels. Brussels due to the presence of the institutions, and 2,000 foreign companies drawn into the city employ 80,000 multilingual locals. In Brussels, there are 3.5 million square meters of occupied office space. Half of this is taken up by the EU institutions alone, accounting for a quarter of available office space in the city. The majority of EU office space is concentrated in the Leopold Quarter. Running costs of the EU institutions total €2 billion a year, half of which benefit Brussels directly, and a further 80 cents come from the expenses of diplomats, journalists, etc. Business tourism in the city generates 2.2 million annual hotel room nights. There are 30 international schools costing €99 million a year. However, there is considerable division between the two communities, with local Brussels residents feeling excluded from the EU Quarter. The communities often do not mix much, with expats having their own society. This is in part down to that many expats in Brussels stay for short periods only and do not always learn the local languages. Remaining in expat communities and sending their children to European schools, rather than local Belgian ones.